Would you believe that a massive creature covered in fur once knelt in silent grief, mourning like a mother who had just lost her child, right in the middle of a frozen forest in Montana? No growls, no violence, just unbearable pain, beside a tiny grave that had been disturbed by the mistake, the hidden truth. Bigfoot doesn't haunt. It remembers. It buries its dead with care, using moss, bones, and stones shaped like hearts. And if someone dares to touch what was once sacred, it doesn't strike. It comes to mourn with you if you too once lost a child. This isn't folklore. Eldon Ward, a former ranger who spent 2 decades in isolation after his son's death, wrote everything down. He's the only man to ever look Bigfoot in the eyes and receive tears instead of fear. You'll witness how a monster taught a grieving father what forgiveness looks like. How a man who was slowly dying inside found redemption through the silent cry of a creature that never spoke but understood everything. Eldon once disturbed the grave of something he didn't recognize. That night they buried the child together, and from that moment, Winter never came alone again. Don't skip this story, because after today, you'll never see a monster the same way again. And maybe, just maybe, you'll realize forgiveness isn't human, it's universal. He had heard every sound this forest could make. For nearly 4 decades, Eldon Ward had walked the back veins of Pine Hollow like a man pacing through his own memory. He knew the groan of an old cedar leaning under snow, the soft collapse of a deer startled by his scent, the howl of a gray wolf far beyond the ridge. Even the silence here had texture. He knew when it was the hush of sleeping birds or the ominous stillness before something was about to die. But this sound, this crack, sudden and wrong, wasn't wind on a branch, wasn't ice breaking off a roof of pine. It sounded like a body folding in on itself, like knees buckling under something too heavy to bear. He stopped, one boot half planted in the crust of snow, breath hanging in the air waiting for an echo. Nothing. No movement, no follow-up thud. Just the way the forest holds its breath when it knows something's watching. He pressed a palm to the cold bark of a spruce beside him, steadying himself. That sound, whatever it was, it came from deep off-trail, past the gully where trees grew twisted from wind, down where the land forgot it ever belonged to people. He almost turned back, but something in his gut, it wasn't duty, not anymore, pulled him forward. 1 foot, then the next. Each step cracking through ice-topped snow, each breath louder than he wanted it to be. He didn't find a body. He found a hollowed tree, old, half burnt at the root, the kind of shape you'd miss from a distance unless you knew how to look for places the forest tried to swallow back. Inside the trunk, tucked into the crevice like a secret being kept, was a bundle. He crouched, gloves off, dried moss carefully braided together like a blanket. At first he thought it was just a squirrel's nest, but then he saw the things inside. A smooth gray stone flat as a riverbed, polished with thumbwear, a tuft of hair, light brown, finer than deer fur, and a small bone. His heart stuttered. He didn't know why. He should have left it. Should have respected it for what it was, not his. But his hands moved anyway. Not curious, driven. Some old reflex in him, older than logic. He wrapped the bundle into his pack, thinking it was maybe some rare animal den. Something worth examining, maybe even worth cataloging. As if it was a gift the forest had finally decided to give back to him after all the years it had taken everything else. He made it home before the sun disappeared. Wind howled behind him as he shut the cabin door, snow already curling at the edges of the porch. Inside, the stove crackled to life, and he set the bundle near the hearth. Not too close. Just enough to thaw the mystery. He didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Something clawed at his mind, not fear. Guilt, maybe. The kind that doesn't have a shape, just wait. He watched the trees outside from the single-pane window, where frost clung like ghosts. Then he saw her. At first, just a dark mass at the edge of the clearing, standing where the trees began. Massive. Still. Watching. He froze, not out of fear, out of recognition. The shape was hunched, shoulders risen high, like grief had pulled the body inward. Its hands, long, too long, covered its face, rocking gently. Silent. He didn't blink. Didn't dare move, because somewhere deep in his marrow he understood. It wasn't looking for food. It wasn't a beast circling prey. It was mourning, and it was mourning exactly where he'd taken that bundle from. She, if he could call it that, stayed there for a long while, just sitting like time had broken and refused to start again. There was no rage in her body, no threat, just the unmistakable shape of sorrow, ancient, still bleeding. When she vanished back into the trees without a sound, without a word, he let go of the breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He sat there in the dim orange glow of the fire, the bundle unopened now, untouched, resting where he'd laid it. The notebook he kept, unused since fall, waited beside his chair. He opened it, wrote in slow, jagged letters, "I thought I found a den today. I was wrong. I think I carried home a piece of someone's soul." He didn't sleep until the sky turned ash gray. By dawn, the frost on the window had a single streak across it, as if something or someone had dragged a hand down the glass from outside. When the wind rose again, it didn't sound like winter. It sounded like grief. And for the first time in decades, Eldon Ward didn't feel alone. He felt watched, not hunted, just held accountable. He stood from his chair, picked up the bundle, and whispered to the empty cabin, "If it's yours, I'll take it back." But deep down, he knew he hadn't found it. He had stolen it, and something out there had just lost their child a second time. Snow had a way of hiding things, graves, guilt, the hollow shapes of what used to be alive, but it never buried the truth for long, not out here. By the time morning light cracked through the fog, Eldon was already out the door, boots crunching against the hard-packed white, each step leading him back to the place he shouldn't have touched. He didn't carry a weapon, just a bundle, rewrapped, retied. The air bit at his skin like it wanted to keep him out, but he kept going. When he reached the hollow, the tree looked different. Not smaller, not larger, just lonelier. Like something sacred had been torn from it, and the woods hadn't had time to mourn. He knelt, carefully. The same way he used to kneel when checking traps long ago, before he understood what a scream looked like when you caught it behind glassy eyes. He laid the bundle down the way it was before, every piece exactly as he'd found it. But this time he saw it clearer. The bone, no longer anonymous, was too smooth, too fragile. Not deer, not coyote, not anything wild. He picked it up, hands trembling, and turned it over. It was a finger. Small. Clean break near the base, like it had snapped mid-grip. His gut turned cold. The moss blanket wasn't haphazard. It had been woven. Not chewed or scratched, but twisted by hand. Clumsy, sure, but deliberate. The smooth stone, heart-shaped, not perfectly, but unmistakably so. He stared at it. Not just a nest. Not a den. He dug into a grave. It hit him all at once. The trembling he'd seen the night before. The huddled figure rocking beside the empty space. The silence that pressed on his ribs like grief. This wasn't some feral creature mourning instinct. It was a mother. A mother who had buried a child, maybe the only one she'd ever have, and now that grave was empty. And he was the reason why. He didn't run. He didn't cry. He just sat there. Snow falling quietly around him, the kind that doesn't make a sound when it lands, just layers itself into your shoulders like regret. He left the bundle where it was, rose stiffly, walked home like a man who just found a confession letter in his own handwriting. That night, wind scraped along the cabin walls, the fire barely held. He sat in his chair, wrapped in his dead son's old flannel, heart thrumming like an old drum left in the rain. Sometime near midnight, something hit the porch. Not a crash, just a dull slap, like fabric tossed in sorrow. He opened the door. No footprints in the snow, no sounds, Just a single piece of cloth laid flat across the threshold. He bent down, picked it up. It was a child's shirt, faded, smeared with dried mud and lichen. The kind of thing a toddler might have worn in spring, stitched by hand. But the stitches weren't human. Uneven, pulled too tight in places, barely holding in others. As if someone had tried to mimic how humans make clothes but didn't quite understand the process. Inside the folds of fabric, something small rattled. A stone. Heart-shaped, and tucked beside it a clump of reddish fur. Not animal, too soft, too clean, bound with a loop of grass like a keepsake. He didn't move for a long time. His hand clenched around the cloth tighter and tighter until his knuckles cracked. That shirt. He hadn't seen one like it in years. But he remembered how it felt to dress his son 30 years ago, hands still calloused from the field, trying to tie buttons while the boy giggled and wriggled. He could smell it. He could smell the baby powder his wife used, the sweet rot of apples mashed in the boy's pockets. And now all he could smell was damp moss and guilt. He stumbled backward, dropped the shirt on the table, pushed away from it like it might burn him. His notebook lay open nearby. He reached for it, flipped to a blank page, and wrote without thinking. I buried my child once. I built him a box with my own hands. I said goodbye. But now I've dug into another grave not knowing, and the goodbye I stole wasn't mine to take. The wind howled again. No words, no threats. Just air screaming on behalf of something that didn't have a tongue to curse him. He didn't sleep. He sat there watching the shirt as if expecting it to vanish. By morning, frost had crept into the cracks of the windows, the kind that glows a faint blue when the sun tries to push through. He barely noticed it. His body was cold, but not from the weather. That stone, that bone, that shirt. Each one now part of some equation he couldn't solve. A language he wasn't meant to read but had interrupted anyway. The line between man and beast had shifted beneath him. He'd stepped somewhere he wasn't supposed to. And now she knew he understood. Not through threats, not through anger, but through silence. He picked up the shirt again, held it like something fragile, like he might crack it just by remembering wrong. And as he held it, he whispered, You didn't come here to hurt me, Adam. You came to tell me what I'd done. And the worst part was, she had done it kindly. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't taken back what he stole by force. She had just left a reminder, a message, an echo. You took my child. He couldn't shake it, the way her body folded near that hollow. Not an animal's grief, a mother's, real, raw, not so different from his own. That night, when he lay in bed, the shirt folded beside the lamp, he stared at the ceiling until his eyes burned. He didn't pray. He didn't speak. But before sleep found him, if it ever did, he made a vow. He would return everything, and he would do it not as a ranger, not as a man, but as a father who finally understood what it meant to bury something before you were ready to let it go. He didn't bring a gun, didn't bring firewood, or food, or matches, just the shirt, the moss bundle, the small bone wrapped in cloth, and the heart-shaped stone. Everything he'd touched that wasn't his. He left before dawn, walking with slow, careful steps, like a man moving through sacred ground. His boots creaked against the frost, the kind that formed thin white webs across the underbrush. Wind moved in low waves, carrying the breath of pine and old ash. The same wind that used to carry his boy's laughter through the trees 30 winters ago. And now it whispered through a forest that watched him with quiet, ancient eyes. He found the tree again. It hadn't changed. Still hollowed like a wound, still waiting. Eldon didn't speak. Didn't kneel right away, just stood there, hands clenched at his sides, holding grief he wasn't ready to name. His shadow, long and thin in the morning light, bent against the frozen earth. He looked down at it and wondered what shape she had when she stood here. If she still came. If she was near now. He lowered himself with the stiffness of age, joints aching like warning bells. Opened the shirt with care, placed each item into the hollow the way a man might tuck away a memory he's not ready to lose. He arranged the stone first, then the bone, then the fur. Finally, the moss. He pressed it down gently, like a parent smoothing hair after a nightmare. And then he sat. Not far, not close. Legs crossed, hands in his lap. His back against a low boulder, the kind shaped by time, not hands. The cold reached into him but didn't shake him. The waiting had weight now. Familiar. For hours, the forest said nothing. The sun climbed just enough to remind him it was there. Then dropped behind clouds again like it too had regrets. The fire in his chest, shame, sorrow, penance, burned quietly. He didn't know how long he sat there. It stopped mattering after the second hour, then the third. He didn't move, didn't call out. If she came, it had to be her choice. He just waited, the way someone does when they know they deserve the worst and hope, barely, that they don't. The light faded, shadows thickened, then a shape moved through the trees. No crunch of leaves, no break of branch, just a slow shift in the air, a presence. He didn't turn, didn't breathe too deep. The shape stopped across from him, just beyond the roots. In the dimness, he saw the rise and fall of a chest. Broad shoulders curled forward, arms long, heavy, trembling. She stood still. Long minutes passed. Then she stepped forward quietly, not threatening, but not soft either. She moved to the hollow, kneeling. Large hands hovered above the moss. She didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, she turned her head slightly, looked at him. Their eyes met. There was no language, no gesture he could make that would be enough. But he found his voice anyway, barely more than breath. I didn't know. She didn't flinch. I thought it was just, his throat clenched. Just some old den. I didn't know it was your child. Still, she watched. I brought it back, he said. All of it. I put it back. She exhaled. Not a growl, not a cry. A sound that felt like something leaving her chest that had been trapped too long. She looked at the moss, at the stone, at the shirt still draped beside the tree. Then she lowered her head. It wasn't a bow, not submission, not threat, just a lowering, the way a mother leans close when she finally lets herself weep. He saw her shoulders shake. Not much, just enough. His own chest buckled. He looked away. Couldn't bear to see what he'd done reflected back in her sorrow. His hands reached for the dirt beside him, dug into it like they needed to hold on to something. I buried my boy too, he whispered. Only I had the right to, and you didn't get that. He closed his eyes. He felt the earth shift slightly. When he looked again, she was still there. But now she sat across from him. Not hunched, just present, watching him the way grief does. Quiet, immovable, patient. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It had weight, recognition. She didn't lash out, didn't roar, didn't run. She simply stayed. And that somehow was worse, because it meant she understood him, and she forgave him. Not with words, not with smiles, but with stillness and presence, and that slow, pained nod of a creature that has already lost too much to waste time on blame. The sun dipped further. Light went blue. Wind coiled around the two of them like breath held between strangers. He didn't speak again. She didn't move again. But for the first time in years, Eldon Ward wasn't alone in his guilt. Later, when he wrote in his journal, his hand shook so badly the ink ran crooked. She didn't touch me. She didn't curse me. She sat with me like I was one of her own. I've never been so ashamed or so forgiven. He didn't sleep much that night, but he dreamed. And in the dream he saw her walking away from that hollow, carrying the moss bundle, cradled in her arms like it was warm again. And in that dream the snow didn't fall, because some things, even in winter, deserved a moment of peace. The first rain didn't come with thunder, no lightning, no warning. Just a low murmur rolling across the pines like something ancient shifting in its sleep. It fell soft at first, more mist than water, trailing down the sides of the old cabin like fingers on glass. Eldon Ward stood at the doorway, cup of cold coffee in hand. watching the earth wake up wet. It had been weeks since the ground last moved like this. Weeks since he saw her. Weeks since he sat by that hollow tree with his sins laid bare in front of her. The quiet hadn't left him since. It followed him indoors, into his sleep, into the pages of the worn journal by his bed. It was in the way he opened drawers slower now, in the way he walked past his son's old room and didn't dare look inside. But today felt different. He didn't know why. The rain smelled cleaner, not just water, something else. Earth turning over like forgiveness if forgiveness had a scent. He finished the coffee, set the mug down, and began to gather the pieces. Not just the bundle he'd returned, but everything else. Every fragment of memory he'd kept buried deeper than even the forest roots dared grow. The last of his son's baby teeth, still kept in an old matchbox. A scrap of blue cotton from the quilt Miriam stitched during the pregnancy. One of her old hairpins, rusted, bent. A photo, water-stained, of a birthday cake with a number 3 candle barely visible behind frosting. He placed each one carefully into a torn flannel shirt. His son's. The same one the boy wore that fall morning years ago when he ran out into the yard chasing leaves and never came back smiling. Eldon bundled it up without tying it shut. The cabin held its breath. So did he. He walked, not far, not the trail toward the ridge where he last saw her, but to the place behind the woodpile where the trees leaned close like eavesdropping neighbors, and the old cottonwood split at the base made a kind of altar he never meant to make. He laid the shirt down like it was a child's body. No ritual, no cross, no hymns, just silence. Then he stepped back and waited. For a long time, the only sound was the slow drip of rain through the canopy, the hiss of it sinking into thawed ground. But then, a breath, not his, not wind. He turned. She was already there. No sound of approach, no flash of shadow, just the presence of her, massive, damp steam rising from her shoulders like smoke from a dying fire. Her eyes locked on the bundle. He didn't move. She stepped forward just once. Rain traced down her arms. Her fingers flexed, and then she tore a handful of hair from her own chest. Thick, dark, matted with blood. A single cry broke from her mouth, not a scream, but something lower. Something close to song. She pressed the wet hair against the bundle. Her blood mixed with the cloth. Then she backed away. Eldon's knees buckled. He hadn't expected it. The pain. Not hers, his. Because in that moment he understood. She wasn't just giving part of herself, she was giving a name. In her way, she was burying the child again. Not just hers. But his too. Together. He didn't know when he started crying. But he couldn't stop. Not when she looked at him again. Not when she lowered her head in one long, slow movement. Not when she turned and disappeared into the trees. Her back marked with scratches, her shoulders drooping like someone who had carried too much for too long. He stood there until the rain turned cold, until the ground soaked through his boots, until he could no longer tell the difference between what came from the sky and what poured out from inside him. That night he didn't turn on the lights. He sat at the edge of his bed, the journal on his lap, and he wrote by candlelight. I watched her give blood to a bundle of bones and cloth, and I cried not because it was strange, but because it was sacred. She buried her dead again, and in doing so, she buried me too. The part of me I never made peace with, the part that couldn't look at my son's face in dreams. She saw it, all of it, and she didn't flinch. He set the journal aside, walked to the window. Outside, the trees glistened in the fading rain. The sky over Pine Hollow hung heavy, a pale bruise of dying light. And in the yard, at the edge of the clearing just past the swing that hadn't moved in years, there stood a circle of moss. Not placed, grown. Perfect round, bright against the mud. Eldon pressed his forehead to the cold glass. The breath fogged everything, but he didn't look away. Because some part of him knew. That wasn't a marker. It was a promise. The fever came like a whisper. It started behind Eldon's eyes, a slow, burning pulse that turned his vision soft at the edges. He ignored it at first, chalked it up to fatigue, age, the weight of too many memories pressing on one man's bones. But by the second night it had sunk deeper. His skin burned while his teeth chattered. He tried to keep the stove going, but even the fire seemed too far away to warm him. The cabin felt too big all of a sudden, too hollow. His bed too cold. He lay curled under two blankets, sweat soaking through his long johns. The cough came sharp and low, like something wet was trying to claw its way out of him. He reached for the canteen beside the cot and knocked it to the floor. It rolled under the table. He didn't bother to try again. His thoughts unraveled. Sometimes they were about the woods, the hollow tree, the weight of moss in his hands. Other times he thought he heard a baby crying. But it wasn't a baby. It was further off, wounded, calling through fog. He drifted, came back, drifted again. In the haze of fever, something moved through the room, not a shadow, not wind, a shape. He didn't lift his head. Couldn't. Just let his eyes rest half-lidded as the floorboards creaked beneath something heavy but slow. A deliberate kind of weight. Then came the warmth. Not heat from a flame, but something solid, alive. There was breath beside him. Not human. Wet and earthy like cedar and fir. A presence. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry bark. Only a rasp came out, and even that faded before it reached air. But he wasn't alone. He didn't have to see her. He knew. She had come. He didn't know why. He didn't deserve it. But she stayed. He felt the pressure of something near the stove. The rattle of a metal pan being nudged. The soft thud of wood placed into the firebox. Then a spark, a smell of smoke and warmth. Real this time. The fever pulled him under again, deep, quiet. When he woke, the cabin was dim but not dark. The fire was still going. He blinked against the dry sting in his eyes. There, on the chair across from the cot, a bundle of grass twisted into a ring, set on the floor like an offering. Inside it, resting in the center, was a bone, small, clean, with a single notch carved at the end like a crescent moon. Dried blood painted across one edge in a rough line. It wasn't from the child. He could tell. The bone was too thick, older, a piece of her. He sat up slowly, every joint aching. Reached for the bundle with a hand that barely obeyed him. His fingers hovered just over it and stopped. Because he understood. It was a gift, not just to say goodbye. It was a piece of herself, left behind for him. Something sacred, something impossible. He didn't know how long he sat there with the bone in his hand. He didn't know how she had come in, how she had left, or how she had known. But she had. She'd seen what even he hadn't wanted to admit. He was dying. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And she knew, and somehow she grieved it. Not as a woman weeps for a child, but as a mother sees something familiar in another's pain and chooses to carry some of it. He wrote again that night, even though his hands trembled and the pencil snapped twice before he could finish the page. She didn't wait for me to earn her forgiveness, she just gave it. And now, she's given me more than that, a part of her. A bone from her own body, not as warning, not as relic, as remembrance, as if I'm to hold on to it, guard it, like the soul of her child was wrapped in it. Or maybe mine. The cabin was silent except for the occasional pop of firewood splitting. Outside, the trees moaned under the weight of new snow. Eldon sat for a long time in that chair, bone in his hand, ring of grass cradled on his knee. Something changed in him that night. Not like a man healed, but like a man returned from some edge he didn't know he'd been walking. He stared out the window into the dark. No movement, no sound, but he whispered anyway. I'll keep it safe. And for the first time in years, he believed himself. Because she had. Because she knew he would. Because she'd chosen him. Not as a mistake, but as a keeper of something that no longer had a place in the world, but still mattered. The drawer stuck the way it always did, warped by time, swollen by cold. But Eldon didn't yank it. He slid it slow, respectful. Like opening a box you buried 30 years ago and finally had the nerve to look inside. Inside were the things that hadn't seen daylight since before his hands shook. A cracked belt buckle. A postcard from his brother in Kansas. The tooth. Just one. A tiny incisor with a darkened root wrapped in wax paper labeled in shaky ink. Ben, age 6. He stared at it. It was smaller than he remembered. Lighter, too, but it held weight no bone should carry. He sat with it in his palm. Let it rest in the soft crease near his thumb where a man's hands start turning back into a child's with age. Across the room on the shelf above the stove was the bone she'd given him, tied with a loop of moss. Not tucked away, not hidden. Right there in plain sight beside the tin of tea and the oil lamp. 2 bones. Two children. One buried, one given. He didn't cry. Not right away, but something moved in him. A tightening. Like a wire pulled through his chest and anchored behind the lungs. He set the tooth beside the larger bone. And then, like it was the most natural thing in the world, he slid the moss ring over them both. Let them sit there, together. The sun through the window was thin, filtered by fog and the dust no cloth could ever wipe clean. It cast the faintest glow over the makeshift altar. He whispered, "I should have done this a long time ago," then sat down at the table, pulled the notebook toward him. The pages were stiff now, some corners warped from steam or tears, he wasn't sure. He uncapped the pen, let it hover, then pressed it down. I never asked to be forgiven, not by Miriam, not by Ben, not by her. But she gave it anyway. And that's the part I don't understand. How something not even human could see the man I've been and still trust me with part of her. He paused, listened to the silence, the kind you earn, not the kind you're punished with. I think I understand now. It wasn't about making peace with her. It was about learning how to bury the right thing. Not my guilt, not the memories. Just the blame I kept wearing like a coat I never took off. He set the pen down, looked at the bones again, felt still. Not happy, not absolved, but still. Later that afternoon, snow returned light at first. The kind that doesn't stick, just lingers on the railings and the lips of branches like a secret being whispered too slow to hear. He lit a fire, sat beside it with his hands close to the flame, fingers spread. And then, as if by instinct, he pulled out the yellow envelope he'd stuffed between 2 books long ago. It had her handwriting on it, Miriam's, still in blue ink, still slanted, clean, and distant. He hadn't opened it. Not in 3 decades. He didn't even know why he'd kept it. But now he did. His fingers trembled as he unfolded the flap. The paper inside was thin, folded twice, neat corners. His name at the top. Just his name. Eldon. Then, if you ever decide to stop hating yourself, maybe you'll find your way back. But if you can't, then at least do one thing before you go. Forgive yourself for the things you didn't know. Forgive yourself for being afraid to feel it. Because I still believe the man I married is somewhere in there. And I think you know that Ben wouldn't want to haunt you. That was it. No signature. No goodbye. Just the truth. Written soft and heavy. He folded it once more. Placed it beneath the moss ring. Then reached for the matchbox. Lit a single candle. Let it burn beside them. A quiet kind of vigil. That night he didn't dream of her. Or the boy. Or even the hollow tree. He dreamed of snow falling over a riverbed, still endless, and someone walking alongside him without speaking, not holding his hand, just near enough that he didn't feel lost. He woke to gray sky, ash-colored clouds low and waiting, no fresh footprints on the porch, no new marks in the snow, just the sense, deep in the chest, near the ribs, that someone had been there, someone who came without needing to be seen. He made tea. Sat in his chair, and said aloud, voice cracked from sleep, "I didn't just bury my son. I buried every chance to be a father again." And she saw that, and she gave me a part of hers like I could be something more than a man who lost everything. He smiled barely. Not joy, not peace, just the feeling that something had finally settled. Somewhere in him the silence wasn't punishment anymore. It was company. And outside the snow kept falling, not to cover anything, just to remind the world how soft it could be. It started the same way every year. Somewhere in the first hard week of December, when the light thinned out before 5 and the wind came down sharp from the cliffs, he'd wake up to find them. Not deer prints, not rabbit, but those wide, flat impressions, half melted in the morning snow, leading up the porch steps and then stopping clean. Never past the door, never closer than the woodpile. As if whatever made them knew not to cross a threshold it didn't belong to, but still wanted him to know. It had been there. He never spoke about them, not to the ranger who stopped by once a season to check permits, not to the clerk down in Rock Timber when he bought his winter salt and canned peaches, not even to himself. But he knew. He'd opened the door just after dawn, mug still warm in his hand, and there they were. Tracks too large, too even, toes splayed in a way that wasn't animal. A stride too deliberate for anything four-legged. Some days it was just one print, some days a pair. But always facing the cabin, always pointed at him. He didn't feel fear. He hadn't, not since the night she gave him part of herself. It wasn't the kind of presence that meant danger. It was a check-in. A shadow pausing at the edge of memory. Something alive that still remembered him. This morning they were there again. Fresh. The snow was only an inch deep, soft and clean. The air had gone still in that eerie way it sometimes did before weather turned. And there they were, prints like shallow bowls in the white. He knelt slowly, bone creaking, knees catching, and touched the edge of one. The center hadn't frozen, still warm. He looked up toward the tree line. There was no one, but there didn't have to be. He stayed there for a long time, fingers in the snow, breath fogging his glasses, his heart not racing, but something in him awake. He stood, went back inside, and began his own ritual. He twisted a small branch of pine into a loop, the way she had done. Tied it with a strand of wool from an old scarf. Set it outside just past the edge of the porch. He never saw her take them. But the next day they were always gone. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes he'd find something in return. A smooth river rock shaped like an eye. A strip of bark with 2 perfect thumbprints pressed side by side. One year, a single feather from a bird not native to Montana. Little things, but enough to know she remembered. And maybe that was what he needed most. He sat that afternoon with the notebook in his lap, hands steadier than they'd been the year before. People ask me if I'm still alive. They don't use those words, but it's in their voices, the way they say, still up there in the woods, none, like I'm not supposed to be. Like life doesn't live without noise or witness. But she knows I'm still here. She comes when no one else does. He paused, listened to the fire hiss. Every winter she walks back into my silence just long enough to remind me I was never the only one carrying grief. And somehow that's more comfort than all the prayers I ever mouthed in church pews, hoping to feel something again. He closed the book, set it back on the shelf, then walked to the window, hand resting on the old lace curtain Miriam once tried to replace but never did. Outside, dusk was settling early. The snow took on that soft glow, silver where it caught the sky, purple where the shadows clung low. And just beyond the stump, where the wild roses used to grow, a shape moved. He didn't flinch, just watched, large, still, blurred by fog. She didn't step forward, just stood there, half in, half out of view. And then, one sound, not a growl, not a howl, a breath, long, low, somewhere between sorrow and recognition. He pressed his palm flat to the window pane. The cold seeped in through the glass, bit at the thin skin of his wrist. The shape didn't move. He whispered, not loud enough to fog the pain. I remember you too. And maybe she heard. Or maybe she didn't need to. Because when the wind rose again, it came from the north, slow and soft. The kind of wind that doesn't want to shake the trees. Just brush against them and move on. The shape faded, gone before he could even step out to sea. He didn't chase it, didn't call. There was nothing to chase. She was never running. Jayduma just passing through, just letting him know he wasn't the last one left. That night he lit the candle again, set it near the bones, the moss ring, the tiny tooth. His family, in a way no one else would understand, in a way that needed no explaining. He knew it before the first cough came, before the cold settled into his lungs like wet ash, before the tremble in his hands returned stronger than before. He knew it the way the trees know when snow is coming, even before the first flake falls. There's a kind of stillness that sets in, a kind that doesn't go away. The fire had gone out sometime in the night. When he opened his eyes, the shadows in the cabin were longer than they should have been, and the cold didn't bite. It just held. The kettle on the stove was untouched, the windows clouded. His breath barely rose in the air. He swung his legs over the bed and sat there for a long time, listening to the groan of the cabin settling. Or maybe that groan was inside him. He wasn't afraid, not anymore. There was a quietness in his chest that didn't come from defeat, just knowing. Like a man who's lived long enough to stop waiting for the ending to surprise him. He pulled the old journal into his lap, the one with the soft leather cover and frayed stitching at the corners. His fingers shook as he gripped the pencil. It took 3 tries before he got the point to meet the paper, but then it did. And he wrote, "If someone finds this, don't call her a monster. Don't try to name her. Don't try to catch her. Don't try to prove she existed. She doesn't need your belief. She needs your silence, your reverence, that's all." He paused, closed his eyes, let the pencil roll out of his hand and fall to the floor. It didn't matter if the sentence was finished, the meaning was still there. He rose slowly, wrapped himself in the quilt his wife left behind, the one with the faded blue stitching and uneven corners. He crossed the cabin to the shelf and pulled down the stone, the one shaped like a heart, then the small tooth, the ring of moss, the bone she gave him, each one placed gently side by side on the nightstand. He stared at them, felt something stir in his ribs, not pain, not sorrow, just the ache of understanding. She hadn't needed him to say anything when she gave him that bone, and she wouldn't now, but he still spoke, voice a thread. "You forgave me before I ever did." Then he sat down, hands folded over the quilt, and looked out the window. Snow was falling, the real kind, not flurries, not wind dust, but thick flakes drifting like feathers, soft and slow, settling on every branch and broken fence post like a blanket. He let the silence grow, and then he smiled. Just a little. Outside the window, tucked beneath the porch overhang, a shape moved. It didn't come forward, didn't ask to be seen, just stood in the stillness. The outline of her dark against the snowfall, broad shoulders hunched, head tilted slightly, watching. She didn't raise her hand, didn't cry out. She just watched. And he watched back. No fear, no guilt, no need for apology, only recognition. He placed his palm on the window, fingers spread against the cold. For a moment they stayed like that. Him inside, her outside, with only glass and years and pain and forgiveness between them. Then she turned and vanished back into the tree line, leaving no prints behind. He didn't move. Didn't need to. The candle beside the bed burned low. The wind shifted once, and the room grew quiet in that way only winter understands. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and breathed, long and steady like someone remembering how to sleep. And in that final moment nothing hurt. Not his hands, not his chest. Not even the part of him that used to scream in the dark for something he didn't have a name for. The storm rolled on. The pine trees bent low, and inside the cabin the light faded slow and soft, like dusk in a place that's already been forgiven. She buried me in silence, not to end me, but to keep me. Because some things, when forgiven, don't disappear. They settle, they rest, and they stay. Sometimes the heaviest things we carry aren't the ones we can hold in our hands. They are the memories we didn't know how to grieve, the silence we kept too long, the forgiveness we were too afraid to ask for or offer. And yet somewhere in the quietest corners of the world, healing still finds its way in. Not loud, not sudden, but slowly, like snow falling over wounds time forgot to close. This was never a story about answers. Not the kind that fit neatly in science or myth. It was a story about what happens when two kinds of sorrow recognize each other and choose not to turn away. About what's possible when we stop asking to be understood and start offering understanding. About how even the most broken things can become sacred if we let them. Some grief is too wild to tame, some love too deep to explain. But when we witness it, truly witness it, it leaves something behind. Not proof, not legend, just presence. And sometimes that's all we ever needed. There are truths the world isn't ready to name. Not because they're too strange, but because they're too human. And in the end, it's not about what we believe is real, but what we choose to hold sacred, what we protect, what we remember. So wherever you are, whatever silence you've buried, whatever forgiveness you've withheld, even from yourself, may this story sit with you the way a hand rests gently on the shoulder. Not to push, not to pull, just to say, you are not alone. If this story moved you even a little, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment, share what stayed with you, or simply let us know you were here. And if you'd like to walk with us through more stories like this, raw, strange, and deeply human, go ahead and follow the channel. Every share, every word, every bit of time you spend with us means more than you know. Thank you for listening, and thank you for remembering.